All right, everyone, we'll get started. Whew. So, this is actually our last afternoon together. I know. It's been an incredible 2 days. So this afternoon, we are going to close it out by hearing from Senator Kim Pate. And I just wanted to explain a little bit of process for the presentation. Kim would love to have as much of a dialogue and discussion as possible throughout her presentation. So if at any point you have questions that you would like to ask during her presentation, please put up your hand, and one of the incredible staff members and volunteers at Women's Network will come by to pass you a microphone so you can ask your question. And so we want to encourage as much dialogue and conversation as possible throughout the presentation. And there's also a floor mic down here that you can come stand by, and that will be our cue as well that you would like to say something or ask a question. So thank you to Kim for opening up the floor in that way. But I wanted to first welcome Marie Burge to the stage. For those from PEI, Marie needs absolutely no introduction, as she has been a visible advocate She has been a visible advocate on a variety of issues for decades in PEI. Marie, as program coordinator at Cooper Institute, has been involved in work related to guaranteed livable income since it began, and we welcome Marie to introduce Senator Kim Pate. Oh, sorry.
I can't tell you what a pleasure this is to welcome Kim Pate, Senator Kim Pate, back to Prince Edward Island. She's a faithful visitor here. She's very proud of the fact that she's actually from here because her dad was born and brought up in O'Leary. So many times Senator Pate has come and visited with us and met with us as the PEI Working Group for a Livable Income. And her support has been very important to us. And we're hoping that that will continue. And so I'm going to give the formal introduction. Kim Pate was appointed to the Senate of Canada on November the 10th, 2016. First and foremost, she is the mother of Michael and Madison. She is also a nationally renowned advocate who has spent the last 45 plus years working in and around the legal and penal systems in Canada with and on behalf of some of the most marginalized, victimized, criminalized, and institutionalized, particularly imprisoned youth, men and women. Her work in the Senate is focused on the development of robust social, economic, and health systems that leave Canadians well off and no Canadian behind. And I must say that her words today will probably give us a really good boost to go out and do the things that she stood for, and she stood for years and is intentionally a senator because of the work that she wanted to do for the marginalized people. Senator Pate.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you for that very generous introduction. It's always a pleasure to be here, not just because my dad's from PEI. And once, I just have to tell a little story that everybody here will understand. I once got a call from CBC here in Charlottetown, and they said, "We want to do a story on islanders who've moved away. And so we want to focus on the work you're doing." This is when I was working with kids in the system. And I said, "Oh my, you know what? If you do that, all my relatives will be calling you, and you'll have endless complaints because she was not raised on the island because her father moved away and she was raised elsewhere." So I was never on CBC's, Islanders who moved away, because it would have been a fraud. So. But it is true that I love to come back. I come back every summer and bring my dad, and in many of those visits, I've had the opportunity to meet with the amazing folks here who are doing the work. And, I was asked earlier today what made me interested in this issue. Well, when I went to, I grew up, my dad joined the military, he actually started, or was supposed to finish high school here when it was Prince of Wales College. He attended here in the early 50s. And he had been raised during the war, and all of his family, he was the youngest, and everybody else went off, his cousins, his sisters, and his father. And so he took off and joined the military, but without an education, he ended up being a driver in the military. So I was raised essentially working class, and I was the first in my family to get a university education. But my dad working 3 jobs was part of how he did that. He worked full-time in the military as a driver, he worked as a taxi driver on the weekends, and he was a school bus driver during the weeks. And that's how he made sure me and my younger 3 sisters and my mom were all supported. And so some would say, I would say now that the roots of this understanding came from that, of course. But then I went to law school, and I learned at law school the law applied equally to everybody until you actually go into a prison and you realize that's absolutely false. Our prisons are full of the people who are failed by every other system. And an example I often used is I started working with young people, and I would go to what was then called the Truro School for Girls and the Shelburne School for Boys. And in the 2 years that I was doing the work from Nova Scotia, there was 1 kid from PEI in the Shelburne School for Boys, none in the School for Girls, as they were termed. And while I was at law school, the Young Offenders Act was introduced, and one of the things that all the provinces negotiated is they all wanted jails, because they said, some of you will remember the days, I'm old, so I remember it, when the age of majority changed. It was different for girls and boys. And so because the age of majority for criminal activity was going to be leveled off at 18, there were boys and young men who had been in prisons designated for adults who were suddenly going to be classified as youth. And so all across the country, provinces started arguing for jails for kids. PEI was one of them, and you may know that you have a jail on Summerside for kids, that at the time they got it housed 34 kids, and within months of it being opened, it was full. So you went from having 1 kid in 2 years to 34. And that to me was emblematic, not of bad kids on PEI, but it was emblematic of when you have no other supports and services, and when you aren't providing the kinds of supports people need, jails are the only place that can't refuse folks. And it's not hard to criminalize people if they're poor, if they're struggling with trauma, if they have mental health issues, if they are racialized. It's not hard to find reasons to criminalize. And so it wasn't a surprise to me the jail filled up, but it was, to me, emblematic of what was wrong with when we use our legal system. I don't call it a justice system because there's not much just about it. And so over the years, I worked with John Howard Society, I worked with Elizabeth Fry Society, and about 25 years ago, every single policy we would develop when I was with the Elizabeth Fry Society always had a component that included a guaranteed livable income. A lot of folks don't know that. Some people thought it started when I went to the Senate. But one of the things I realized is if we don't build up community, we will just continue this trajectory of using the prisons, the criminal legal system and the prisons to deal with the issues that we don't deal with in society: poverty, racism, all the levels and intersections of discrimination. So how did that get to the Senate? Well, when I was doing the work, particularly with Indigenous women, it was a group of Indigenous women when Trudeau decided to free up basically make the Senate more independent, who I'd been working with, who said, you've been talking about the need to build robust social, economic, and health systems to redress and address and prevent people from ending up in the system. If you really mean it, let us put your name forward. And some of you know the first stage of the independent appointment process were nominations. And so they wanted to nominate me. And I thought it was very, I was humbled and honored. But I had been a pain in the you-know-what of every government. And so I didn't think there was a hope of you-know-what that I would ever be appointed. And so when I got the call, no one was more shocked than me. But one of the things Trudeau said to me is, we want to see the kind of activism that you've been involved in all your working life. By then it was about 35, 40 years. We want to see that in the Senate. So I hope you bring that to the Senate. Well, I heard that. I took it seriously. I actually think he meant it. I don't think he had a clue what it meant. And probably the first time I voted against one of his budgets, he wasn't very happy, nor were a lot of people. But it was Hugh Segal who egged me on. And of course, when I joined the Senate, I wasn't the first to be interested in this, not by a long shot. Senator Kroll, back in 1971, had headed up a anti-poverty committee. They had recommended it. The late Hugh Segal, of course, was a huge champion and worked very closely here in PEI with all of you developing the model, and also Art Eggleton. And I had been part of civil society, or community basically, as part of the anti-poverty, the all-party, nonpartisan anti-poverty caucus for about 10 years before I joined the Senate. So there's a long, rich history that comes long before I get there. And when I got there, I planned, my first speech was to be about why we needed a guaranteed livable income. Some people I really respect, said to me, maybe don't start there. People already think you're a bit out there, and you'll just convince them that you're out there if you start with that. And these are people I really respect. Not Hugh Segal, sorry, Murray Sinclair and others. And he said, start with something a little closer to home. Let people know the kind of work you're going to do here. And so I did start. And some of you know I started first talking, I linked it to economic insecurity and racism by talking about the mass incarceration of Indigenous women in particular, and the circumstances that led to them, a situation where we still have 1 in 2 women serving federal sentences are Indigenous, and the majority of them in there for responding to poverty and violence against them. So full circle to the very issues that you're focused on here the last couple of days. And I'm sorry that I couldn't be here the last couple of days. It's been great to be here today. But it was really clear to me, and I was appointed on my actual birthday, my 57th birthday, and if I don't cark it or quit before, I get kicked out on my 75th. So you guys do the math. 3 years in, I'm like, okay, I haven't talked about this. We've upended a few people. Some of you remember Senator Bayak and her racist response to my first. Some people don't know that was all in response to my first speech, and it pulled out of the woodwork a lot of the racist, misogynist attitudes in the Senate by people talking about the residential school denialism, all of that stuff, the anti-poor sentiments, and so when I turned 60, I said, okay, I don't care if people think I'm wacko. They can think whatever they want. And so I decided I was going to introduce it. But it took a bit of time to get things on the order paper. So by the time I'm speaking to this and talking about launch what we called an inquiry, which basically means I'm interested in this. Anybody else interested? And you put it out to all the senators and then encourage people to speak about it. And so I launched an inquiry into why Canada needs a guaranteed livable income. Well, 3 weeks later, the pandemic hit, and suddenly what looked like an out there idea suddenly looked like a feasible idea. And in fact, at the time we were, I think, 89 in the Senate, 50 senators wrote to the Prime Minister and said, now is the time, we need a guaranteed livable income. This is what we need. And so you saw the momentum building. We then heard from many, many members of Parliament, including, of course, your own Sean Casey, who spoke this morning. We heard from many folks who said, maybe it's just not the time, maybe it is the time, but it was clear that this was an issue that had support in every party, including the Conservative Party. Hugh Segal was part of the Conservative Party, so it predated this time. There was support, but there was really seemed to be reluctance to move forward. So then we did the inquiry, but it was clear there was a lot of interest. Then the pandemic hit. Then we saw what happened with CERB, that no other benefit, the employment insurance, which should have been set up to do what CERB did, was not fit for purpose. We also found out during that time that every single benefit scheme that existed had antiquated administrative, I'm a techno-twit, so I can't tell you. But anyway, all the technology was ready to be retired. That's how old it was. And so we had, all of the technology wasn't fit for purpose. And the only reason CRA could do anything is there was a bright guy whose name, because I'm, getting old, I've forgotten his name now, which is, I'm sorry, I mean no disrespect to him. But he was a guy working in CRA 30 years ago who said we should start thinking about making CRA electronically accessible to people. Gee, what a concept. And it was because he had insisted that people should be able to file their tax returns electronically that they had moved far enough ahead that they were the only system that could roll out the CERB. And so we saw, it wasn't perfect, but we saw that you could actually do the kind of rollout in a responsive way within days, certainly a week, but within days of a crisis happening. So it made us all start thinking, okay, if you can do it for that, we should be able to talk about how we streamline in other areas. So that got a bunch of us talking, the Anti-Poverty Caucus as well as others. And I started talking to lots of you who are here in the audience, as well as folks in other parts of the country, as well as internationally. And then I talked to Leah Gazan, who many of you will know is a First Nations Member of Parliament from Treaty 1 territory in Manitoba. And she and I decided we would jointly launch a piece of legislation, a framework piece of legislation. Neither she nor I, she as a Member of Parliament doing a private bill, me as a senator doing anything except a government bill, can launch something that's going to overtly cost the government money. So many people's first question is, why not just do it? And some argued we should try and use the spending power authority that the federal government has. That's great. But again, I can't do it as a senator because the rules don't allow me to actually launch something that will cost the government money. If they were going to do it, presumably they'd do it, and then I might offer to sponsor it, but that wasn't happening. So we developed a framework document which said, in order to do, would basically require the government to start getting together with provinces, territories, municipalities, as well as Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit governance bodies, and to look at how we could develop a framework and roll it out. Some of you will know that in the preamble, we also talked about the need for other services, that this isn't only a financial option. Some of the criticisms that have come from economists and from folks who are often listened to by the government is that, and the BC panel sort of came to this. I argue they came to an incremental approach as opposed to a no basic income. But in most cases, people come to an approach saying, you know, we need to have something, we need to have an approach for some people, and they often leave out, I don't know who they leave out, they say, we need it for people leaving violence, we need it for kids, we've got the child benefit, we need it for seniors, we've got the guaranteed income supplement, we need it for people with disabilities, we have a wholly inadequate, monstrously problematic disability benefit right now that needs to be fixed. And then you say, okay, well, who don't you want it for? Well, you don't want it for the people you think don't deserve it. And so the myths and stereotypes around poor people became really blatantly obvious. And so we started talking about how do we actually deal with that. Well, we started developing fact sheets, and you may have seen the fact sheets out front. And you know, we've tried to, with expertise from, again, many of you in the room and across, start dealing with some of the issues. So what were some of the issues? Well, the cost. Is it going to discourage work? Is it going to cause inflation? Is it going to be at the expense of existing programs? Will it reach the most marginalized? What about Indigenous people? What about victims? What about farmers? What about fishers? And, you know, how can we cost this? So we tried to address those. So we're actually developing some additional ones right now. And so, you know, stay tuned for those. They're all on our website. You're welcome to get the hard copies that we brought. Please take them, because if I have to haul them back to Ottawa, and I apologize. It's not the most I should have just sent the link, and that would have been better, because you guys have all been fabulous at doing that, and I need to adopt my dinosaur ways to more climate-friendly approaches. So I do apologize for that. But seeing as they're printed, if you can use them, please take them. And we're going to continue to try and challenge those attitudes. So some of you will know, on Wednesday I reintroduced it last week, but we had second reading on Wednesday, so my first speech to it was on Wednesday. And already many people in the Senate and in the House of Commons are saying they're hopeful that this time the bill will pass. Last time we got it to Finance Committee, it got interrogated. Those of you who listened to the Finance Committee, you heard all the myths and stereotypes in abundance as people made comments about, you know, what poor people will do with money other than use it to rebound out of poverty. And so we're now going to try and get it to the Social Affairs Committee to have a look at the broader human impact, and hopefully get it then out of there to the House of Commons, where Karina Gold has offered to carry it. And as you may know, she was the only candidate for the leadership of the Liberal Party who was willing to put it in her platform. And so she's keen to go. Others are very keen as well, as like Sean, but now that he's he was going to carry it last time around, but now that he's parliamentary secretary, he can't sponsor the bill. So Karina will, and will hopefully get it moving. So that's a bit of where we are, and we're. I see many. Sir, it's hard to see people. I wanted to have a dialogue, but I see sort of a glare in my trifocals. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
I can yell.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm just wondering, Karina Gold, do you know what bill she is going to be submitting? Is it going to be a parallel bill to yours, like Leah Gazan did, or is it going to be another bill?
Good, very good question. So last time, something that apparently hadn't been done before is Leah and I decided to submit the same bill the same day, one in the House of Commons, one in the Senate, so that whichever one got furthest, fastest, we could just get behind. And what happened was her bill was defeated on the floor. And in fact, it meant that the one that I was doing might have been defeated, or there would have been an argument raised that it should be defeated because it was substantially the same bill. We've changed a few things in this version of the bill, mostly adding in food security and housing security as part of the preamble to make sure it's there. I thought it was implicit, but the fact that so many people asked me about it, it was clear it wasn't, so we added that in. We also, in consultation with a number of First Nations and Inuit leaders, amended a bit the notion of elders to be a recognized elder in those communities, which of course made sense. Again, I thought was implicit, but clearly wasn't, so we corrected that. And then we also took out any reference to specific groups, and to be very clear that it should be universally accessible, income tested, but universally accessible once people drop below a certain. So the answer to your question is, it would, once it passes through the Senate, when it starts the process in the House of Commons, it would be Carina picking it up. So it wouldn't be a parallel process this time. It'll go through the Senate. And I'm pretty confident that it will get through the Senate. Oh, that's fabulous. That's great. Thank you. Let there be light. And so, yeah, and so that's the way we're going. But yeah, thank you for asking that.
Hey, Kim.
Yes. Hi, Joe.
So, as you know, there's some national organizations working on establishing a sort of people's reporting platform so that we can sort of monitor and speak to government and international bodies around Canada's performance with human rights treaties, SDGs, stuff like that. Do you feel like that is something that can be helpful in organizing for a basic income? And if so, how? And also, what else can we do, like right now, as you're starting to do this, to best support your effort?
That's a great question. Thank you. Well, yes, and if those of you who don't know, Joe has done incredible work, taught me how to use international instruments and human rights mechanisms. So, even though I'm probably older than you.
No.
So I think pressure on a number of points will be incredibly helpful. Of course, letting your MPs, your senators know. I know people are here from all over the place, so letting your senators and MPs know is really important. And a good example of how well that works is Marie and your gang, getting sicked on Senator Down. Man, you got Senator Down is a lovely man from here in PEI, who his big focus is on lowering, good for him, the tolls on the bridge and ideally eventually making it free, and on offshore tax evasion. And he has, he's been very clear that if we get resources from those places, we can fund these sorts of initiatives. So I think going after folks, but also looking at the international instruments and ensuring that when we're reporting, when Canada is reporting internationally on how we're doing on civil and cultural rights, on human rights, on racism, on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, that we report all the time on the economic insecurity. And I had the fortune of, I was at the guaranteed livable income was the Bertha Wilson moot. Now, those of you, does anybody know when I say what a moot is? Moot competition. So, law students, when they're training to be lawyers, have mooting competitions where they literally argue cases. Well, this year, the Bertha Wilson moot, so Bertha Wilson was the first woman on the Supreme Court of Canada. She happened to go to Dal as well, where I went, and because it was a basic income, they decided to use the I'm coming around to saying the Ontario challenge. The court challenge is another great thing. They use that court challenge as their mooting problem. So all the students from all across the country suddenly learned about basic income because they had to argue for the basic income. And then usually it's Court of Appeal judges, they have judged the final moot. Well, they asked me if I would join the panel, so I was one of 3. Those judges got it completely wrong, but there you go. But we argued that it's time for us to again look at a positive obligation under the Charter for economic rights, because you know, it's over 20 years ago since in Gosselin, another Supreme Court of Canada case, they said that, you know, that if the provinces and territories couldn't afford it, well, too bad, you can leave people destitute. I mean, that's not, they said it in much nicer, flowerier legal language, but that's essentially what they said. And I think it's time for us to argue that as a fundamental right. Well, some of the law students got it and did it. They didn't win because the judges went along with what the precedents were. But I argued now's the time. If not now, when? And we're in the middle of a pandemic. We've got homelessness problems. In order to get to do the moot, walking in downtown Toronto, there was like, I can't tell you how many homeless people and people destitute we were walking literally through to go and argue this case. And so, and then they asked me to speak that night. And so I talked about, you know, when we get law degrees, they're not just things, you know, that you stick on the wall and say, oh, ain't I great? They should be active. You know, they're a document that allows us to go out in a world with a privilege that not everybody has, and we have a responsibility to make the best arguments we can for the people who have the least. And I think that's also a role of a senator, by the way. One of the reasons Senate was set up was well, the you know, the body of government and all that. But in Canada, the idea was to try and equalize a bit the regions. So the Atlantic region has a whole bunch more senators than the Western region to try and help equalize on issues. And we are supposed to represent the interests of those who aren't represented by elected authorities, either because they're considered minority or marginal issues. And that's fundamentally what we should be doing. So I think there's a whole bunch of those mechanisms we could be using, and I thank you for encouraging us to keep thinking along those lines, that if, you know, Canada dines out internationally on being a human rights leader. We have shirked that responsibility for my entire working life, and we need to step up. And so, you know, I think we can. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Yep.
Hello. Hi, Senator. I actually think you just answered my question. I'm actually a lawyer for the National Association of Women in the Law.
Oh, great.
And my question was going to be, how can legal advocates support you in this, and how can national organizations support you in this as well?
That's great. I heard you guys did a great presentation. So thanks for all the work. I've been involved with NAL since I was, you know, in law school. When, by the way, sorry, no offense to the men here, but the guys in the class all decided to go naked and put little Men in the Law papers as they were talking about how we didn't really need women in the law, because if we got to law school, surely we'd achieved equality. We were 29% of the class, but anyway, I digress. So we have made movement in some areas, but no, I think it's great. The more national organizations can be pushing on these issues, I think the better, because oftentimes it's seen. The other thing I want to say is it's a time for us all to pull together. One of the things I've learned from watching, and you know, you may think I'm, you know, a little out. Well, you may have already thought that. That's okay. But you know, during the pandemic and during the convoy, I went down and started talking to people, and not because I wanted to be harassed, and yes, some of that happened, but because I wanted to try and get a grasp, like, where was this all coming from? And deeply rooted for many of those folks was the fact that they had been left behind. The government had failed them. And so people I knew and loved were there, joining in. People were being sucked into that vortex because they had been left behind. And it really struck me that the right has figured out some ways, and I don't mean this in, well, I guess it is political, but I'm thinking more ideology. They have figured out ways to come together even when they disagree on lots of things. And we have not done this best job. And I think working across sectors, across interests, to link in economic security, to forget about our personal. Now, me, you know, I'm in a really privileged position, so it may be easy for me to say, you know, I'm all right, Jack. But the reality is, I think the more we can work across sectors, across groups, across regions, the stronger we'll be, because it's when we can be divided. I was just in Nova Prison recently, and I was talking to some of the women, and one of the things I said is, we need to have an assembly again. And they said, yeah, you need to do that. One of the things, in a prison I learned really quickly is the fastest way to control people is to divide them. Tell this one, I'm going to give you this little bit, but I'm not going to give it to them. I'm going to give you this authority, this access to policy making, but not them. It creates divisions that we need to resist. And so wherever we can do that, let's do that. And I'm not, I hope I'm not sounding too Pollyannish, but it's the kind of things many of us have tried to do over the years. And I think now is the moment where we could actually achieve something pulling together. We've seen it already, right? We saw PP go from 30 points up to, lose his seat. And so we know that we can pull together, and it needs to be not just nominal. It needs to not just be performative. We need to actually dig in and say, you and I may not agree on this, but we agree on, in this case, on guaranteed livable income and a robust social, economic, and health system. There may be personal things that I do that really irritate you. For that, I will apologize. That's who I am. I do irritate people. I don't mean to, but I'm kind of weird, yeah. But if you can look past that weirdness and say, but on these issues we can work together, that's great. And I think that's a bit of what we're trying to do in the Senate right now. It's what we're trying to do with the MPs. It's what hopefully we'll be able to do much broadly than that. So I hope you're keeping track. I keep seeing hands now, I'm not sure. Okay. Sorry.
Just kind of a tactical question, actually, because we've been having a lot of good, applied conversations the last couple of days and thinking about your bill in the Senate. I would bet that many more people in this room have experienced advocating to their MP than meeting with their senator. So I'm just, and obviously the Senate has some different structure, different priorities. Is there anything we should be doing differently in reaching out to senators? Are there any secret tips, cheat codes?
Don't do mass emails.
Okay.
I used to coordinate mass emails before I was in the Senate. I now realize we have all these search engines that have rules and they just slough them off. So I never see them, half of them. So the best thing is, it sounds trite, but calls to them, ask for meetings, write letters, all of those things. Sometimes letters, I actually got a great letter the other day from someone in Ottawa. And they said, if someone is vetting this, please call or email me and let me know. And I thought, okay, well, no, I'm responding to it. So I said, I wrote back and said, that was a really good tactic. That was a really good way of making me make sure, or someone in my office make sure I saw it. So, but yeah, no, I think we have been used to not being responsive as well. But I think we should be. And so, and a really good example is a new senator who I'm going to be meeting with later tonight too, Senator McAdam, called me up last year. I was in New York, and she said, "Are you telling people I'm not supporting your bill?" And I said, "No." And I said, "But people have asked me whether you support it, and I've suggested they ask you because." You and I haven't had an in-depth conversation. Well, that led to so many calls to her office or to her or stopping her in the street that she's now looking, she's working on this stuff. So that's credit to you guys, not me. And so that's a really good concrete example of how effective it can be, because sometimes they haven't even thought about it. Again, I mentioned Senator Down, who initially was like, that's your issue, that's not mine. But he now comes to many of the events, and he, I often credit Marie in particular, but all of you, it's not just Marie, but a number of you reached out to him, and he heard that, and he paid attention. He has been very clear, it's not going to be him championing it, but he won't stand in the way. Well, sometimes that's good. I don't expect everybody to stand up and take on every issue, but if they at least get out of the way of causing problems for it, that's a huge benefit as well.
Hi, sorry. I had a question that might be a bit of a tangent from everything you've been talking about so far. But did you have any thoughts on how we can combat disinformation? Especially like right now in youth, like more and more studies are coming, especially since the last like American election and things like that, where young people, especially like young white men, tend to have like these parasocial relationships with billionaires where they relate more to them and will vote in a way that they think they are too billionaires, where they're voting against their own interests, where they're advocating for things that will benefit Elon before they will benefit them because they're closer to being houseless than they are to being billionaires. And like those things, I just find like that's something I'm really struggling with, like how to penetrate like that manosphere or like that social media discourse where people are like embroiling each other into like this frenzy against like anti-poor sentiments and things like that. So,
well, the way that I've been trying to figure out how to deal with it is asking young people, particularly young men. And so I'm sure the guys in our office, because I was teaching at the law school when I got appointed, so the law students still work in our office as interns. And so, you know, they often joke that I'm like, what do you think about this? And they say, we're not necessarily representative. And I say, okay, I'm not accusing you of doing it, but like, how would you get at this? And, you know, all joking aside, I mean, one of the things, it was part of the reason I did TikToks. It was actually my daughter who was in high school and then she was in university at the time. And she said, you have to get on the platforms where young people are. And I said, I'm not singing and dancing. Like, yeah. And she said, you don't have to do that. And to her credit, she worked with, you know, I paid her, not out of the Senate budget, by the way. It wasn't a nepotism. But I paid her and one of her friends who was a videographer. So some of them are still out there because we had to go off the platform. And because virtually everything I do gets scrutinized by a certain group, I haven't gone back on TikTok. But we are trying to figure out which are the ways that we can actually appeal to. So all of our social media is done by young people we hire, and if you have ideas of how else we can access, I'm not asking you to then answer your own question, but if you do have ideas, I also do try to engage with, you know, like I've gone to events where, you know, it'll come in the office and Andrew, who does a lot of this scheduling, will say, oh, you're not doing this one. And it'll be the business, I don't know, commerce students. It's mostly, you know, quite frankly, white guys, and I'll say, no, I'll go do that, because I want to talk about basic income with these guys, the economic arguments. I want to talk about who's left out, and you know, I do think we ignore at our peril, but we engage. I engage as thoughtfully as I can, because it's basically the work I've done all my life, right? I've worked with people who other people have thrown away, and so I know that part of the way I've always done my work is, if I don't understand how you got there, I can't figure out how to help you come back or to prevent anybody else from ending up there, whether it's kids who've been abused or, you know, or. And so that's part of what I'm trying to do. I wish I knew how to really address it. So any and all ideas are always welcome. So yeah, I think it's a huge threat. I think the backlash to equality issues, it goes without saying. I mean, everybody's seeing it. So, but that backlash has left a narrative that some people, particularly white young men, have been left behind, and you know, there's a whole lot of people been left behind, and really being able to talk to them about how many people have been left behind and how we need to be pulling people back in and demanding. And that's what I meant a bit by the government having failed to, you know, eviscerate, you know, part of the reason we had to social distance so much and do all the things we had to do during the pandemic is we had so eviscerated our healthcare system that we had to try to not, you know, flatten it and with demand. And that's on us. And when I say us, I mean, I wasn't in the government then, but I am now. That's on us, that by eviscerating healthcare, economic, housing, all of those things, we actually set people up to be in more precarious situations. So I think also it is partly us owning it and saying, yeah, we need to do better, and pushing. I mean, it's part of why I missed one of the morning sessions, because I went out, I wanted to, oh my God, it's already 10 minutes, okay. So I usually time myself, but thank you for doing that. So, you know, I think we do need to keep challenging that. And, you know, today when Carney introduced his economic, whatever it was called, bill, or he didn't, but the minister did, I think I'll be going back. I've already sent messages saying who I want to meet with to talk about, okay, that's great for that group, but what about the group you're still not addressing? And we even did things like we renamed our fact sheets, because one of Carney's line, maybe only I notice these things, but one of the things he said is we're going to spend less on government and invest more in people. So I thought, great, spend less on poverty, invest more in people. So we changed the fact sheets, and I thought, that's easy. It'll, an appeal to them. And then, have tried to make not just the economic argument, but a more fulsome argument. And thanks again to, all of you. Like, we've taken from your stuff, we've borrowed from people who are already expert out there and doing the work. None of this is original, and by the way, if you want to use any of it, just take our name off it, put your name on it, and use it. It's like, that's what it's there for, so. Yeah. So I wish I had a better answer than for you, but yeah. I forget who was next. No one? Okay, we're done? Oh, there's. I think they're recording it, because I was trying to do that too. So I'm a loudmouth, so yeah. Me too.
Okay. So just to give a little bit of background, I've been interested in this subject for a really long time, especially in the mechanisms that drive successful social change. So I was a student of psychology at Prince Edward Island, or UPEI. Now I'm a policy analyst, and I've been very interested in the body of research and academia that might be an area that's super underlooked. So the reason why I'm bringing this up, it's been on my mind this whole time since the conference started, just because we were talking about ways to, I kind of call it a knowledge translation, ways to disseminate information and garner policy support about the social issues we care about. So anyway, what I wanted to say is that I've been collecting research related to the psychology of changing minds, why we're so attached to certain ideas, and when you understand that, it's easier to understand how you can change them, because obviously change happens on different levels. But the very first level is psychological. There's also structural. There's the inter-level, where we interact with each other. Anyway, I don't know if you've heard of the work of Nat Kendall Taylor or Frameworks Institute, but they do a lot of work around framing social issues and testing them to get more policy support. But basically, there's ways that you can present information that can either increase your support, do nothing, or even decrease the support. So one of the studies that they talked about is one where they were trying to get something done related to helping, I think it was like homelessness and substance use problems. And they tested the values that were talked about, because often the values that we try to appeal to people, like compassion, connection, empathy, and then they tested other values. And what was unfortunate to see, was that trying to appeal to certain values that didn't resonate with the people of what we were trying to change actually decreased this policy support for the social issue. So this is obviously sounds a lot more like commentary, and now I feel kind of weird about that. But I guess my question would be related to sort of like the success of that, or if you can resonate with any of the things that I mentioned, but yeah.
Yeah, no, in fact, Dr. Zhao, Jiaying Zhao, who's a psychologist at UBC, got interested in this because of the psychology, what she calls the cognitive tax of scarcity, which is how limited your ability to think is if you don't have resources. And so, and when I first talked to her, I often tell this story because it was during the pandemic, and I saw something that she was doing the cash transfers with, the 50 people, $7,500 cash transfers. And so I wanted to learn more about what she was doing. So I called her up or called and left a message. And then she responded and set up a Zoom right away. Well, she was in California at NASA, for God's sake, getting some $10 million grant to do some God knows what, excuse my language, but anyway, some research. And yet this was the piece that she was most interested in, is the whole issue of how we don't take care of people and how we're, and how we leave people behind. And so when she got the grant, that's what she did, and some of you know she's now trying to get 200 people and give them $8,500. And what she found was that even her own colleagues were against the research. They thought, you're going to give $7,500 to homeless people? They're just going to, excuse the language, but piss it away. And she was so confident that wouldn't happen. And she said, I'll take full responsibility. And she's one of the few researchers that I know. You guys are smarter than me, so you may know others. But she paid people to do surveys on what they were spending the money on. It was no strings attached, but she paid them. And it's the only study I know where she's tracked what people actually did spend their money on. And people spent less money on drugs, alcohol, and cigarettes, even people with addictions and mental health issues, once they had the cash transfer. Completely put, to rest, well, not to rest, but completely challenged people's notions. And yet people still persist. Oh, well, that must just have been the ones that she did. And so, that whole issue is one that she and I talk about a lot, is how do you actually convince people? And, Evelyn Forget said it, Hugh Siegel said it, Tracy said it, Jiaying said it, people just don't want to believe that poor people are not there of their own volition or choice or decision-making, poor, whatever it is. And that's the piece we have to challenge. So I don't know how best to do that. I've tried to do it by telling stories. That's also what Jessie Gollum did through her Humans of Basic Income. Some of that works for some people, but and it's partly why, quite frankly, I think, oh, there's a new idea. Okay, I'll try that. And it probably looks scatterish because it is. Because I'm just trying to think, okay, well, if that appeals to that person, and the other day, it was a couple of stories I told where I linked women I've known and how they started out. And one of the senators came to me afterwards and said, when you told the story of how TONA started, it all made sense. We have to stop that cycle. Another law that I've introduced is to get rid of segregation. It's a whole nother, but it's linked in the sense that her first entry into prison was breaking into a school to get away from being raped at home. And it was because she had no money and no place to go. She was criminalized. The minute they got her into custody, they strip searched her, she fought back. That led her to being isolated. That led her to keep fighting back. And, 30 years later, she spent 10 years in isolation, almost 15 years in the mental health system with isolation-induced schizophrenia. And when you can unravel that story right back to that moment, sometimes people will listen. I don't know. I honestly don't know what fits for each person, and that's why I try everything. And maybe that's a downfall, because maybe it means that I'm not as focused as I should be. That was a common complaint of teachers of mine. But I don't know what else to do except to keep trying to, because none of us, not one of us will achieve this. It will be a collective movement that pushes that this is the time for it. And like Sean, I actually feel we're on the cusp of it. And so I keep trying to figure out if there's a new way, I'll try it. If there's something else, if you're doing it, I'll try and amplify. And if I haven't been amplifying stuff you're doing, it's probably because I'm too stunned to figure out how to do that. If you're on social media and you're putting stuff out and I'm not amplifying it, get in touch with us, because the smart young folk in our office will make sure that changes, because that's part of it too, is making sure people know this is a collective effort. I may be introducing the bill, but it won't be me who gets it across the line. It'll be everybody working together. Yeah. Let's see.
I know there are hands up, but I had the mic. No. Oh, sorry. Quick question. So I'm so grateful for your work, Senator Pate, and for your openness to trying so many different ways. We've heard amazing voices in the last 2 days of people working from so many different strategies, so many tactics, so many ideas for advocating Canada towards a basic income guarantee. And we've asked you how we can support you in the Senate bill, but what can we do to uplift you in your work? What can we do to uplift the everyone in this room who is working so hard from all different approaches and with all different different ways of advocating? What's the best thing we can do for that uplift?
Well, first of all, I'm a public servant, so I should be doing this. I should be earning every penny that I get of taxpayer dollars. So, but I do think it is really about making sure we amplify what is happening and that we work across, that we work together, that it's not a siloed approach. There's been for me, the biggest frustration is when I'm going to one group and they're not talking to another group, and I just think, like, who's that helping? And we heard it this morning about the number of people that I know who are really, really struggling every day is it's heartbreaking. And I often say I vibrate between rage and despair and try and get laser focused on action. So because otherwise you get. I get stuck if I stay there. So I think really it is keeping pushing on this. And really, thank you. I'm grateful that I got invited to be here. 30 seconds. Okay, shut up, Kim. Okay, so I'm really grateful to be here. And I think, pulling together, I think now is also a time that we say, out of this, let's issue a statement that, everybody here called for PEI, and Carney and the Premier to launch the PEI pilot. Why not? Or demonstration, sorry. Let's do that. And if you want, you make up a quote that I said, go ahead and add it in there. And make it really good so it looks like we're going to really do something. But in all seriousness, I think it is, whenever there are opportunities to take that action, let's just say, okay, I know it's time, but is there anybody here who disagrees with that? No. So we can do it? Everybody in favor that we do that? Okay. Great. There we go. So that's something we can take right out of here, and I can also amplify back in the Senate and with all my colleagues. I'll take the statement and circulate it to everybody. So thank you. Thank you very much for all the work you do. Oh. And this is a young woman who I saw her T-shirt and I bought one, and she then told me that because I put it on social media, she didn't have to shut down her company that she was about to close down. She's an Indigenous woman who wants to support. If you couldn't read it, it says safe, affordable housing and a livable income are medicine. And it's Meme Teas, Messages of Hope. So anybody who has the means and is interested in giving her some business, that's partly, I was going to put it on and then I realized I didn't bring pants and that would not have been a good look.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator. Your ongoing commitment to basic income guarantee, but in particular, the work you do to amplify and value the work of grassroots advocates is greatly appreciated. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. Woohoo! Sadly, this brings Act Big to an end. We are so great. Just the conference, the movement carries on. We feel so much gratitude for being able to spend the past 2 days with all of you. You know, Women's Network was started in 1981 by a group of local feminists in PEI. Woohoo! And for our first decade of work, we consisted largely of a monthly feminist magazine called Common Ground, and we hosted an annual women's festival, which was really a place to highlight the work that women were doing, but also to raise consciousness around different issues, to share knowledge, and to mobilize. And so even though that was well over 40 years ago now that we were created, I think in many ways we continue to do that. We continue to bring people together, build relationships, strengthen relationships, learn from one another, and try to mobilize for change. And so it's kind of incredible that this small organization over 40 years later can bring people from across the country, can bring people who are, you know, senators and experts and advocates and working at the grassroots across Canada together. And so we're a very small organization, but I think we have a large impact. And we're so grateful that all of you were able to spend the past 2 days with us. We really want to harness the momentum from this gathering as much as possible. So we will definitely be taking a little break to recuperate, but then you will be hearing from us. We invite you to stay in touch with us as we continue to advocate for guaranteed livable income. Please refer to those resources that we provided through the QR code. We've also added a link to our Act Big website. So that's going to be a place as this project and this work continues to evolve, that you can stay up to date and we can continue to mobilize around this issue. And I just want to say a huge thank you. I have heard from so many of you how much you've been enjoying this conference and how smooth everything has been. And that is because of the hard work of a very small team of people at Women's Network who have diligently been organizing, have put so much thought into consideration into everything that we have done to try and make it as inclusive and welcoming space as possible. So just an amazing round of applause for all the staff, board, volunteers at Women's Network. A lot of work went into this behind the scenes, and I know I've heard from many of you that you really appreciate that. But we're also constantly learning and improving how we do our work. So we will be sending all of you an evaluation survey as well. We're really keen to hear what could be improved so we can, change things and learn and grow for future events, because hopefully this is one of many gatherings like this. Although Jill and Hillary probably need a little bit of a break between now and our next big event. But a huge thank you to all of you. This is now officially the closing of the Act Big conference. You're welcome to mill around in the lobby, chat with people, but we will ask just that you exit the theater as we will start cleaning up here right away. But you're welcome to hang out in the lobby or in the space outside of the theater. So thank you once again. And I love the idea of a statement. So once we take a little break, we will get to work on that and be in touch with everyone. So enjoy your time in PEI and have a lovely weekend.